Most people think evil is easy to recognize. They imagine cruelty, anger, violence, manipulation that is obvious. But the most dangerous people you will ever meet do not arrive looking dangerous. They arrive looking trustworthy, attractive, intelligent, emotionally aware. They make you feel seen before they make you feel small. And by the time you realize what they truly are, they have already entered your mind, your emotions, your identity. Some of you listening to this have spent years blaming yourselves for damage someone else created inside you. You called it love, you called it loyalty, you called it trying to make things work. But what if the exhaustion you feel is not because you are weak? What if it is because you have been psychologically fighting a person who feeds on confusion, control, and emotional power? Tonight, we are going deeper than surface-level motivation, because this conversation may explain things nobody has ever been able to put into words for you. Why certain people leave you mentally drained after every interaction. Why some relationships slowly destroy your confidence while everyone outside thinks they look normal. Why you became anxious, insecure, and emotionally disconnected while trying to love someone who secretly enjoyed your suffering. And here is the terrifying truth. Evil people do not destroy your life immediately. They destroy your relationship with yourself first. So before you dismiss this video, pay attention closely, because one sentence in this conversation may reveal the truth about someone you trusted for years. And once you see these signs clearly, you will never look at people the same way again. The first sign you are dealing with an evil person is not aggression. It is confusion. Real manipulation rarely begins with shouting, threats, or obvious cruelty. If it did, most people would leave immediately. Instead, it begins subtly, quietly, almost invisibly. It begins with emotional contradiction. One day they make you feel deeply valued, and the next day they become cold without explanation. They praise you in private, but embarrass you in public. They speak with affection, then punish you with distance. And because human beings are naturally driven to seek emotional consistency, the mind starts working overtime trying to solve the contradiction. This is where manipulation becomes dangerous, because the victim often believes the problem is communication, when in reality the problem is control. A psychologically healthy person wants clarity. They want understanding. Even during conflict, there is a desire to resolve tension and restore connection. But a manipulative person understands something profoundly disturbing about human psychology. Confused people are easier to dominate. When you are emotionally disoriented, you begin doubting your instincts. You replay conversations repeatedly. You search for hidden meanings in simple interactions. You become hyper-aware of tone, timing, facial expressions, pauses. Your nervous system slowly shifts into survival mode, and eventually you stop asking whether the other person is unhealthy and start asking whether you are too sensitive. That shift is the beginning of psychological captivity, because once someone can make you distrust your own perception, they no longer need to control you directly. You begin controlling yourself for them. You censor your emotions before speaking. You rehearse texts before sending them. You apologize for reactions that were completely human. You become afraid of expressing disappointment because somehow every conversation ends with you carrying the guilt. And this is why emotional manipulation is so difficult to explain to outsiders. There are often no visible bruises, no dramatic evidence, just a slow erosion of certainty happening inside the mind. People from the outside may even admire the manipulator. Many emotionally dangerous individuals are socially intelligent, charming, articulate. They know exactly how to perform kindness publicly while creating instability privately. And the victim, exhausted from trying to maintain peace, begins appearing emotional, reactive, even irrational. But what people fail to understand is this: prolonged confusion changes human behavior. A person who is constantly psychologically destabilized will eventually react emotionally, not because they are weak, but because the nervous system was never designed to live in a permanent state of emotional contradiction. This is why manipulation is never just about lying. It is about creating an environment where reality itself becomes negotiable. The manipulator says, "I never said that," even when you remember every word clearly. They accuse you of overthinking after deliberately provoking insecurity. They disappear emotionally, then return with affection just when you are about to detach. The cycle repeats until confusion becomes normal. And the frightening part is that many people mistake this emotional instability for passion. They say, "We have intense chemistry." No. What they often have is psychological inconsistency mistaken for emotional depth. Real love creates safety. Manipulation creates addiction. There is a profound difference between being emotionally stimulated and being emotionally damaged. But many people were raised in environments where unpredictability felt familiar, so chaos becomes confused with intimacy. And this is where the conversation becomes uncomfortable, because sometimes the reason we tolerate emotionally harmful people is not because we are foolish. It is because part of us learned early in life that love must be earned through emotional labor. We become accustomed to proving our worth, chasing validation, calming unstable people, managing emotional tension. So when someone creates confusion, we do not immediately see danger, we see familiarity. That is why healing requires more than recognizing toxic behavior. It requires recognizing the parts of ourselves that normalize suffering. An evil person thrives in ambiguity because ambiguity keeps you emotionally dependent. As long as you remain confused, you remain attached to solving the puzzle of them. But clarity is dangerous for manipulators. The moment you see the pattern clearly, the illusion begins collapsing. And this is why emotionally healthy people pay attention not only to how someone makes them feel in beautiful moments, but to how they feel consistently over time. Do you feel safe expressing discomfort? Do you feel heard without punishment? Do you feel mentally calm after interactions or emotionally exhausted? Do you feel free to be yourself or constantly afraid of saying the wrong thing? These questions matter because your nervous system often recognizes danger long before your mind accepts it. And one of the most powerful moments in adulthood is realizing that confusion is not always a sign to try harder. Sometimes it is the warning sign that something deeply unhealthy is standing in front of you, disguised as love. The people who truly care for you may challenge you, disagree with you, even disappoint you at times. But they will not systematically dismantle your sense of reality in order to maintain control. Because love may be complex, but it should never require you to abandon your own mind to keep someone close. And the moment you stop negotiating with confusion, you begin reclaiming your power. The second sign you are dealing with an evil person is far more subtle than people realize. It is not always hatred, it is discomfort with your happiness. There are people who can tolerate your pain, your confusion, even your self-destruction, but the moment you begin evolving into a stronger version of yourself, something inside them changes. Their energy shifts, their support becomes conditional, their warmth becomes distant, and what makes this deeply painful is that most of the time they will never openly admit it. Because envy rarely introduces itself honestly, it disguises itself as concern, as criticism, as advice, as jokes, as subtle emotional withdrawal, and unless you are emotionally aware, you may spend years trying to earn approval from people who secretly feel threatened by your growth. This happens because unhealthy people often build relationships around emotional hierarchy. Consciously or unconsciously, they need to feel superior in order to feel secure. They feel comfortable when you are dependent, insecure, uncertain, struggling. In that dynamic, they remain psychologically powerful. They become the rescuer, the advisor, the center of gravity in the relationship. But the moment you begin healing, something changes. When your confidence increases, you stop seeking permission. When your self-worth grows, you stop tolerating disrespect. When your life improves, you no longer revolve around their emotional validation. And for emotionally mature people, this evolution is beautiful to witness. Healthy people experience joy when the people they love become more alive, more fulfilled, more independent. They do not experience your success as abandonment. They experience it as expansion. But emotionally dangerous people interpret your growth differently. Your confidence becomes a threat to their control. Your independence becomes proof that they are no longer emotionally necessary. Your happiness becomes a mirror reflecting everything unresolved inside them. And this is why some people become strangely critical during your best seasons. Not when you are failing, when you are finally winning. Pay attention to who disappears when your life improves. Pay attention to who minimizes your accomplishments, who changes the subject when you share good news, who responds to your excitement with emotional coldness disguised as neutrality. Because sometimes what hurts people is not your suffering, it is your freedom. There is a psychological truth many people avoid confronting. Some individuals feel emotionally connected to you through your weakness. Your insecurity gives them purpose. Your dependence gives them identity. Your pain allows them to feel needed, important, superior, or morally elevated. So, when you no longer require rescuing, they experience your healing as rejection. This is why growth can feel lonely. Not because you are becoming unlovable, but because evolution naturally exposes relationships built on imbalance. And perhaps one of the most heartbreaking realizations in adulthood is understanding that not everyone who stood beside you was truly standing for you. Some people were loyal to the version of you that remained small enough to control. You see this in friendships where success suddenly creates tension, in families where confidence is interpreted as arrogance, in relationships where self-respect is labeled selfishness. The moment you begin setting boundaries, speaking clearly, protecting your peace, people who benefited from your lack of boundaries suddenly accuse you of changing. And they are correct. You are changing. You are no longer willing to abandon yourself to maintain connection. That threatens people who built access to you through guilt, emotional dependency, or manipulation. And what makes this dynamic psychologically confusing is that these individuals may still claim to love you. In many cases they do, but love without self-awareness can become possessive. It can become controlling. It can become deeply destructive while still wearing the language of care, because not everyone loves you for who you are. Some love you for the role you play in regulating their insecurities. That is why emotional maturity requires learning a difficult distinction. Support and attachment are not the same thing. A person can be attached to you and still resent your expansion. A person can desire your presence while fearing your potential. A person can say they love you while quietly hoping you never outgrow them. And this is why your environment matters so profoundly. Human beings unconsciously absorb the emotional expectations of the people around them. If you remain surrounded by individuals who are threatened by growth, eventually you will begin shrinking yourself to maintain belonging. You will dim your intelligence to avoid intimidating others. You will minimize achievements to avoid jealousy. You will hide your transformation so nobody feels uncomfortable around your evolution. And slowly, without realizing it, you begin betraying your own future to protect other people's insecurities. But real love does not ask you to become smaller in order to remain accepted. Real love can tolerate your expansion. It can tolerate your confidence, your success, your healing, your independence, your voice. In fact, emotionally healthy people feel inspired by the growth of others because they are not operating from scarcity. Another person's light does not diminish their own, and perhaps this is the deeper lesson beneath all of this. The people who are disturbed by your growth were never deeply connected to your soul. They were connected to your limitations. The moment you understand that, guilt begins disappearing. You stop apologizing for evolving. You stop explaining your boundaries. You stop feeling responsible for the discomfort your healing creates in people who benefited from your pain. Because your purpose in life is not to remain emotionally wounded just so others can feel psychologically comfortable around you. And one of the greatest acts of self-respect is learning to stop negotiating your growth for the sake of people who secretly fear the person you are becoming. The people meant for your life will not punish your evolution. They will rise with it. The third sign you are dealing with an evil person is the most dangerous because it happens slowly, almost invisibly. They disconnect you from yourself, not immediately, not dramatically, gradually, so gradually that by the time you realize what has happened, you no longer recognize the person you used to be. This is how psychological erosion works. At first, you simply feel tired more often. Then you begin questioning your instincts. Then you become more anxious, more careful, more emotionally dependent on their reactions. Your mind becomes occupied with managing tension instead of living freely. And eventually, your entire personality begins reorganizing itself around avoiding conflict with them. That is not love, that is survival, and many people stay trapped in these dynamics because emotional destruction rarely looks destructive in the beginning. Sometimes it looks like devotion, sometimes it looks like intense connection. Sometimes it even feels intoxicating because the emotional highs and lows create psychological dependency. But over time, something sacred begins disappearing, your relationship with yourself. You stop speaking openly because honesty creates punishment. You stop expressing needs because your needs become too much. You stop trusting your emotions because you were taught that your reactions are irrational. You stop listening to your intuition because every warning inside you was repeatedly dismissed, and slowly self-betrayal becomes normalized. This is one of the most tragic forms of human suffering because the damage is internal. A person can look functional externally while internally feeling emotionally homeless. And perhaps this is why so many people remain in psychologically harmful relationships longer than they should. The manipulation becomes intertwined with identity. The victim no longer remembers who they were before the confusion, before the anxiety, before the constant emotional monitoring. They forget what calm felt like, A healthy relationship expands your sense of self. It gives you more freedom to become who you truly are. But emotionally dangerous people do the opposite. They narrow your world. They slowly train your nervous system to prioritize their moods, their needs, their approval, their comfort above your own internal truth. This is why many people in manipulative relationships become disconnected from joy itself. They are no longer living from desire or purpose. They are living from emotional management. Every day becomes psychological calculation. How do I avoid upsetting them? How do I keep peace? How do I prevent distance, anger, criticism, withdrawal? And what makes this especially dangerous is that the person often believes they are preserving the relationship, when in reality they are abandoning themselves piece by piece. Because evil rarely asks for your soul all at once. It asks for small compromises repeatedly. Stay silent this time. Ignore your intuition this time. Accept disrespect this time. Forgive what shattered you this time. And eventually the pattern becomes your reality. There is a profound psychological phenomenon where people exposed to prolonged emotional manipulation begin losing confidence in their own perception. Not because they are weak, but because the human mind adapts to unstable environments by becoming hypervigilant. The nervous system stops focusing on growth and starts focusing on protection. That is why manipulated people often appear exhausted. Their body is constantly scanning for emotional danger, and here is the deeper tragedy. Many individuals blame themselves for the symptoms created by the environment harming them. They say, "I became insecure, I became anxious, I became emotionally unstable," but sometimes your anxiety is not evidence of weakness. Sometimes it is evidence that your soul has been living too long in an environment where it no longer feels safe. And this is important because emotionally dangerous people often benefit from your self-doubt. The less connected you are to your own instincts, the easier you become to control. A person who trusts themselves becomes difficult to manipulate. A person who knows their worth becomes difficult to diminish. A person who listens to their intuition becomes difficult to deceive. So the manipulator slowly weakens your relationship with your inner voice. And perhaps the most painful moment arrives when you finally notice how much of yourself disappeared while trying to keep someone else comfortable. You realize you stopped pursuing dreams. You stopped laughing naturally. You stopped feeling emotionally light. You became smaller, quieter, more cautious, not because life demanded it, but because someone trained you to believe your authentic self was inconvenient. This is why healing after manipulation is not only about leaving a person. It is about rebuilding trust with yourself. You must relearn your own emotions, relearn your instincts, relearn what peace feels like, relearn that love does not require constant self-erasure. And this process can feel uncomfortable because when people spend years disconnected from themselves, silence becomes unfamiliar. Freedom becomes unfamiliar. Stability becomes unfamiliar. Chaos was normalized. Pain was normalized. Emotional exhaustion was normalized, but healing begins the moment you stop asking, "How do I keep them?" and start asking, "Why did I abandon myself to be loved by them?" That question changes everything, because your relationship with yourself sets the emotional standard for every relationship in your life. If you are disconnected from your own truth, people will continuously define reality for you. But when you reconnect with yourself, manipulation loses power. You begin recognizing discomfort sooner. You stop explaining your boundaries repeatedly. You stop romanticizing suffering. You stop confusing emotional intensity with love, And perhaps the most powerful transformation of all is this: you no longer need to lose yourself in order to keep someone close. Because real love does not require the destruction of identity. The right people will not ask you to betray your spirit to earn connection. And the moment you choose yourself fully, the people who depended on your self-abandonment will finally lose access to you.